In 1985, 121 people in South Dakota and Minnesota were struck with a mysterious illness. There had been only one outbreak like it, and the last time it happened, medical detectives couldn't figure out the cause. Valley Springs, South Dakota, a tiny farming community of about 800 people, not far from the Minnesota border. It's a community of farms and suburban professionals, many of whom work in the nearby city of Sioux Falls. People here are accustomed to a virus, but after weeks of suffering, the residents started to compare notes.
There were folks that were sick and had been sick for a long time, and a couple had gone close to death, and they couldn't figure out what was wrong with them, and they didn't know if it was contagious, if it was something in the water.
And they were all feeling these same symptoms. And then they were hearing of other people that were feeling these same symptoms.
When Richard Jacobson went to his doctor, he was told that his thyroid was malfunctioning and was sent to the area's leading thyroid specialist. When Jacobson called the specialist, he had just one question.
Doc, can you tell me why there's 5 people in my small town with the same condition?
Dr. Michael McMillan has been a thyroid specialist in South Dakota for the past.
First ever epidemic of silent thyroiditis, York, Nebraska. Well, York, Nebraska is about 120 miles south of here.
The outbreak in York, Nebraska happened just 1 year earlier. Residents complained of the same symptoms: heart problems, fevers, fatigue, loss of appetite, and weight loss. So many people were ill, it threatened the economy of the small farming community. Doctors from the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta were called in to investigate. But just as they arrived, the outbreak of silent thyroiditis ended as mysteriously as it had begun. The residents recovered, and the cause of the York outbreak was never discovered. Dr. McMillan immediately called the CDC to let them know it was happening again.
Dr. Michael McMillan. I'm trying to get a hold of Dr. Dan Fishmeyer.
Did not have thyrotoxicosis, but their daughter did. Dr. McMillan wanted to know why. When Dr. McMillan learned that the daughter of a grocery store owner developed thyroid toxicosis, yet her parents did not, he decided to investigate. The grocery store owned by Larry and Margaret Long had a specialty item: extra lean ground beef. Dr. McMillan asked the Longs how often they ate the ground beef themselves. They laughed and said, never. It was such a popular item, they were always sold out.
It was a great meat. It was running about 90% lean.
But the Longs said their daughter might have taken some with her on her last visit. On a hunch, McMillan took a sample for analysis. By now, there were more than 100 cases of the mysterious thyroid outbreak, and for some, the symptoms were troubling.
When I had that thyroid scan, a couple gals that work in the hospital, they thought I had cancer is what they told me. They told me this personally, that we thought you were...
Raw hamburger, and cooking the meat usually kills all bacteria and microorganisms.
Most of us eat cooked hamburger, and as a matter of fact, people in the Midwest tend to cook their hamburgers much more so than we do in the Northeast.
Investigators' next step: to do some tests on humans. They also wanted to know how an entire family developed thyrotoxicosis, while their young son did not. When investigators from the CDC found a large extended family who all suffered from thyroid problems except their young son, they wanted to know why. Interviews with the family revealed that the boy didn't eat meat, except for an occasional pepperoni pizza.
I hate meat. I like this.
And his was the same that was sold in the local stores. It came from this local slaughtering house in Laverne, Minnesota. But how was the local meat being contaminated? Public health officials inspected the local meatpacking plant and learned something interesting. The plant had been a kosher killing plant up until a few years earlier.
When animals are killed kosher, they're actually bled to death. And the thyroid gland, it has a real intense blood supply, and it's really red, except that if you bled the animal to death, then it would look white and it would look completely different.
And when the thyroid gland changed color, it was easier for the butcher to see and remove. The animal thyroid was then sold to drug companies.
All of the meatpacking companies would carefully
dissect the thyroids out and sell them to the drug companies so they could make thyroid extract to treat other people.
But two things happened. First, this meat plant discontinued its kosher-killing production. And with the development of synthetic hormones, drug companies no longer purchased the animal thyroids from slaughterhouses. The result? Since the animal thyroid wasn't sold to the drug companies, it was included along with the rest of the neck trim from the animal's gullet, and inadvertently passed along for human consumption.
The gullet basically is this part of the cow's neck. And the muscles that are trimmed, that are low-fat, are these muscles here. They're the sternocleidomastoid muscles on humans. The thyroid gland sits right under those muscles. And if someone is not paying attention as they're trimming, it's very easy to clip off a bit of thyroid gland as they take off the muscle.
When the animal's thyroid gland was mixed in with other ground meat for hamburger, it caused the highly elevated levels of thyroid hormones in those who ate it.
You can imagine that if people ate hamburger 3 or 4 or 5 times a week, they would be getting huge amounts of thyroid hormone over a prolonged period of time.
The meat plant was producing the equivalent of 3,600 hamburger patties each day. But as soon as the problem was discovered, they immediately recalled the beef and instituted safeguards to prevent the problem from recurring.
Well, it was almost like the eureka type thing. We were really quite thrilled. We thought that we had, at that point in time, discovered the cause of this epidemic. And it was something relatively simple.
A simple solution to a complicated problem. After 7 months of investigation, the cause of the outbreak was finally discovered. And investigators believe that the tainted meat also was the cause of the outbreak in York, Nebraska, the year before. Shortly after this outbreak, the U.S. Department of Agriculture instituted strict guidelines for the trimming of meat from neck muscles and declared the thyroid gland was to be considered unfit for human consumption. But the residents of Valley Springs and Luverne don't care much about their place in medical history, and they aren't the type to hold a grudge. 121 residents developed thyrotoxicosis, and all recovered. Fortunately, there were no fatalities.
It's become one of CDC's major teaching cases because it illustrates all sorts of things that are really not usually encountered, but are very important lessons for young epidemiologists.
The outbreak was halted promptly, thanks to skill, intuition, and a little bit of luck. All are important ingredients in a successful medical investigation.